Hello and welcome to this presentation called Remembering the Passing of Abdu'l-Baha Through the Eyes of Six Western Pilgrims. My name is Angelina Diliberto Allen, and I am a member of the Baha'i Faith here at the Parliament of the World's Religions. 100 years ago, Abdu'l-Baha, a central figure of the Baha'i Faith, passed away in Haifa on November 28, 1921. Baha'is around the world are commemorating the centenary of his passing, which took place on a moonless night in Haifa. I have written about the passing of Abdu'l-Baha in this book, which takes the reader back in time 100 years ago to the house of Abdu'l-Baha in Haifa and the events that took place in the weeks preceding his passing. Abdu'l-Baha is the son of Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i Faith. Baha'u'llah, in his will and testament, gave Abdu'l-Baha sole authority to interpret Baha'u'llah's teachings and thereby perpetuate the unity of the cause of God. That unity can be represented by this symbol, wherein the line above represents the realm of God, the line below it represents the realm of God's creation, and the line in between represents the manifestations of the teachings of God. The line that connects these realms represents the divine covenant between God and His creation as revealed through God's manifestations. The twin manifestations of the Baha'i Faith are the Bab and Baha'u'llah. After the passing of Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha was named by Baha'u'llah as the center of the covenant of Baha'u'llah and the perfect exemplar of the teachings of Baha'u'llah. This relationship between Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha can be understood by thinking about the relationship between the sun and the moon. The sun is the source of the light, and the moon is a reflection of that light. In that same way, Abdu'l-Baha is the perfect reflection of the light of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. This year's convening of the Parliament of the World's Religions gives us an opportunity to look back at the great strides made by the Parliament since its inception more than 100 years ago. The mission of the Parliament has been to cultivate harmony among the world's religious and spiritual communities and to foster their engagement with the world and its guiding institutions to address the critical issues of our time. The first Parliament of the World's Religions took place in Chicago in 1893. That convening marked the first formal interfaith dialogue in the history of the world. It also marked the first public mention in North America of the universal teachings of Baha'u'llah. 100 years passed before the next convening of the Parliament, which took place in 1993, and when the Parliament began in earnest to work towards a global ethic. Later, in 1999, the members of the Parliament called to our guiding institutions to join us in addressing the critical issues facing humanity. In 2004, the Parliament gathered around the theme of Pathways to Peace through the Power of Commitment. In 2009, consultation among the members of the Parliament focused on hearing each other and healing the earth. In 2015, the theme of the Parliament was Reclaiming the Heart of Our Humanity, and in 2018, discussions of the Parliament focused on global understanding, reconciliation, and change. This year, in 2021, the theme of the Parliament of the World's Religions is Opening Our Hearts to the World, Compassion in Action. This focus on action brings us back to the Parliament's global ethic. Ethic means ethos, and ethos means culture. This global ethic, outlined by the Parliament, suggests a global culture characterized by nonviolence and a respect for life, solidarity and a just economic order, tolerance and a life of truthfulness, equality of women and men, and a care of the earth. At the center of this global ethic described by the Parliament is a life of truthfulness. Abdu'l-Baha wrote that truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtues. Without truthfulness, progress and success in all the worlds of God are impossible for any soul. Truthfulness, therefore, must be at the foundation of our efforts towards a global ethic. One might say that the ultimate goal of this effort is universal peace. Abdu'l-Baha wrote that the scope of universal peace must be such that all the communities and religions find their highest wish realized in it. That highest wish is expressed in the pivotal principle of the Baha'i Faith, which is the oneness of humanity. From 1853 until his passing in 1892, Baha'u'lláh was exiled and imprisoned for promoting these teachings of oneness, teachings destined to bring about a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world. Among the teachings of Baha'u'lláh is that nature is God's will and is its expression in and through the contingent world. Our care of the earth, therefore, must have at its foundation this spiritual principle. Among the teachings of Baha'u'lláh is the abandonment of religious, racial, political, economic, and patriotic prejudices. Among the teachings of Baha'u'lláh is that religion must be the cause of fellowship and love. Among the teachings of Baha'u'lláh is that religion must be in conformity with science and reason. Among the teachings of Baha'u'lláh is the origination of one language that may be spread universally among the people. Among the teachings of Baha'u'lláh is the equality of women and men. And among the teachings of Baha'u'lláh is the oneness of the world of humanity. After the passing of Baha'u'lláh in 1892, Abdu'l-Baha began to spread the teachings of Baha'u'lláh to the West. It is important to note that when Baha'u'lláh was sent into exile, his family joined him in his exile, and so Abdu'l-Baha, pictured here at the age of 24, was a boy when Baha'u'lláh was exiled, banished, and imprisoned, and it was not until Abdu'l-Baha was a man of 68 years that he was free to travel. In 1911, Abdu'l-Baha began his journey to the West, traveling from Haifa to Egypt, Europe, and North America, arriving in New York in April 1912. His primary purpose in coming to New York was to speak at the Conference on International Arbitration, where Abdu'l-Baha challenged the attendees to be willing to take action rather than deliver speeches about universal peace in a peaceful corner of the globe. Abdu'l-Baha spoke at the International Peace Forum in New York to more than 1,000 people in the audience, to whom he said, "We all know and admit that justice is good, but there is need of volition and action to carry out and manifest it." Abdu'l-Baha spoke at religious sites such as the Plymouth Congregational Church in Chicago, at hotels such as the Ansonia in New York, and universities such as Stanford University in California, where he was invited to speak before 1,800 students and 180 faculty, to whom he said, "We live upon this earth for a few days and then rest beneath it forever. Shall man fight for the tomb which devours him, for his eternal sepulchre? What ignorance could be greater than this? To fight over his grave, to kill another for his grave. What heedlessness, what delusion!" Abdu'l-Baha also spoke to the believers in North America, encouraging them in their efforts to promote the teachings of Baha'u'lláh. He is pictured here in the tent pitched on the future site of the House of Worship in Wilmette, Illinois, where Abdu'l-Baha laid its cornerstone. These houses of worship are the dawning place of the remembrance of God, and where we see the familiar nine-pointed design symbolizing unity. After 239 days in North America, Abdu'l-Baha set sail from New York on December 5, 1912, and those who met him during his visit bid farewell to one who remains without parallel in religious history. Abdu'l-Baha returned to his home in Haifa in December of 1913, where he continued to host visitors and pilgrims from all parts of the world. In the weeks before his passing in November of 1921, there were 6 believers from the West who would be present at his unexpected passing on November 28th. There was John Bosch, who said, "In the teachings of Baha'u'llah, I found that in reality we have only one God and one truth. The foundation of all religions is one." Louise Bosch said, "The faith of Baha'u'llah filled me with a zeal to serve and a recognition of how privileged one is to be part of the beginning of a new order in the world." Grace Krug said, "The more I studied the tenets of the Baha'i movement, the more convinced I became of the importance of its demands for a universal peace." Her husband, Dr. Florian Krug, was inspired by these words of Abdu'l-Baha: "Until man acquires perfections himself, he will not be able to teach perfection to others." There was Joanna Hauf, who came on pilgrimage to Haifa at the age of 27 and to meet Abdu'l-Baha, and she was inspired by these words: "Strive and work so that the standard of the world of human oneness may be raised, so that the lights of universal peace may shine, and the world become a mirror of the kingdom of God." Curtis Kelsey was not there as a pilgrim, rather he was there to install electricity in the Shrine of the Bab and the Shrine of Baha'u'llah. To the caretaker of the Shrine of Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha wrote, "A dear guest is coming to you. He is the person who is going to arrange the lighting of the holy shrines." At the time, the Shrine of the Bab was only the foundation structure that had been built by Abdu'l-Baha. In time, as the result of Curtis Kelsey's electrical installation, the Shrine of the Bab is the brilliant landmark that it is today. Curtis Kelsey also installed electricity in the Shrine of Baha'u'llah, pictured here as it appeared in 1921 and as it appears today. Abdu'l-Baha said that in the future the Bay of Haifa would be illumined by the light of the Shrine of the Bab on one end and the light of the Shrine of Baha'u'llah on the other, so that the light from one shrine reaches the light of the other, even in the darkness of night. Today, the Bay of Haifa is indeed illumined, and one can imagine that the light of the Shrine of the Bab reaches across the bay to the light of the Shrine of Baha'u'llah. It is important to remember that Abdu'l-Baha's sacred remains are in a temporary vault in the Shrine of the Bab, where they have been for 100 years. Soon the holy remains of Abdu'l-Baha will be moved to a shrine dedicated to him, and is being built in the vicinity that lies between the shrines of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. On the night of the passing of Abdu'l-Baha a century ago, the 6 Western believers were staying either at the house of Abdu'l-Baha or at the Pilgrim House across the street from the house of Abdu'l-Baha. Curtis Kelsey was staying in the Pilgrim House, as were John and Louise Bosch. Joanna Hauf stayed in the house of Abdu'l-Baha, and Grace and Florian Krug had been given the upstairs room of Abdu'l-Baha, and Abdu'l-Baha took one of the rooms downstairs, near the front entrance of the house. When the occupants of the house of Abdu'l-Baha went to sleep on November 27th, they never imagined that after midnight Dr. Krug would be called downstairs to the bedside of Abdu'l-Baha. Dr. Krug said, "Shortly after 1 a.m. I was hastily summoned to his bedside. I had the great privilege of perceiving his last earthly breath and of closing his loving eyes." John Bosch said, "After midnight we were awakened in the Pilgrim House by a few loud knocks given in rapid succession, and we wondered what had happened. My watch pointed to 1:20 a.m. Louise said, 'Something must have happened to Abdu'l-Baha. Let us hurry and find out what this unusual call is.' John Bosch explained that in a few minutes we were running to the house of Abdu'l-Baha. Doctors were leaving the house, and we entered the room, finding all of the family of Abdu'l-Baha there. Abdu'l-Baha resting in bed as though he were still alive. Approaching the bed, I could not resist to take his hand, not trusting he was dead. It was warm and lifelike. Then I touched the forehead and hoped that he still might utter a word. But it was only too true that our master had passed away. His spirit had departed. The sister of Abdu'l-Baha then kindly reached her hand to me and motioned me to sit beside her, which I did. The room became filled with friends and people from the town, and the antechamber and the hall, too, became filled. It is indescribable to describe the sorrow and weeping uttered by the people in that hour. To me it seemed that thousands of thoughts went through my mind in those moments. Sometimes there comes to all of us feelings that sigh for expression when only our silence really registers the depth of our emotion, and our moist eyes suggest what words could never reveal. So I cannot express the deep stirrings within me, when all in deep silence I arose again and touched the hand and forehead of Abdu'l-Baha still warm, and I said, "Oh, Abdu'l-Baha!" Louise said, "I had then the feeling that we were standing in a room and in a presence to which no known privilege had given us entrance. I felt that this one time, surely we had literally rushed in where angels feared to tread, and that the shock of Abdu'l-Baha's sudden passing was the cause that had removed certain barriers and restrictions." John Bosch was given the great privilege of joining members of the family of Abdu'l-Baha in preparing his body for burial. The funeral followed the next day, and John Bosch describes it in vivid detail. The hour for the funeral had been set for 9 o'clock the next morning, Tuesday, November 29th. As from an invisible command, 6 of us raised the wooden casket to our shoulder, I being at the head. A call was given, the doors of the house of Abdu'l-Baha were opened, and the casket was lifted from the floor by the appointed pallbearers, who carried it out the front door and down the steps and through the gate to the road which led up Mount Carmel. About 40 carriages were waiting at the gate to join the funeral cortege, but only about 5 were occupied, as all wished to honor Abdu'l-Baha by humbly walking after his remains. Even the British High Commissioner, who had come specially overnight from Jerusalem, walked with the others. Beside him, in full uniform, was the chief of police of Haifa, who had left his horse standing in the street near the house of Abdu'l-Baha. The governor of Phoenicia also walked. "There were men of all nations," continues John Bosch, "of all creeds, of all walks of life, high and low, rich and poor. It seemed that never had there been such a funeral procession. So great was the desire to help carry the casket up the mountain that some of the men were wrangling for the privilege of only touching it with their fingertips. For an hour and a half that great mass of people were slowly moving along the winding road and up the steep incline of Mount Carmel. Once they reached the shrine of the Bab, the coffin was placed on a table, and 9 speeches were given by people of the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim faiths. John Bosch concludes, "It was a perfect day, one of the most beautiful one could imagine. As I turned and looked back now and then, many were the thoughts that came to me as I watched all those people wending their way up the mountain. Behind were the blue Mediterranean and the Bay of Haifa, and 9 miles away was the old city of Akka, and in the far distance the Lebanon mountains. Never can I forget that scene." Joanna Hauff, who also wrote a moving account of the funeral procession, used these words to describe how Abdu'l-Baha was regarded by the people of Haifa. "To the government and nobility, Abdu'l-Baha was Sir Abbas Effendi. To the poor, their benefactor. To the inhabitants of Haifa, their counselor. To others, their greatest philosopher, scholar, and sage." Joanna Hauff concludes her moving account with these words, "Useless my life would appear to me if the power of the experience does not give me strength to really remold my life and to lead it to a high purpose? After the passing of Abdu'l-Baha, his will and testament was read, and it named his grandson Shoghi Effendi as the guardian of the cause of God, and it provided for the election of the Universal House of Justice, the supreme governing body of the Baha'i world, with its seat on the slopes of Mount Carmel. Over the past 25 years, the Universal House of Justice has guided communities across the globe in a worldwide effort to advance the spiritual development of the individual and society. Baha'is and their neighbors gather for devotional gatherings, which foster the spiritual unity of a neighborhood, village, or town, such as this devotional gathering in Morang Sunsari, Nepal, and this gathering in Puerto Tejada, Colombia. In addition to devotional gatherings, Baha'is and their neighbors come together for study circles with the purpose of developing in its participants the spiritual capacity for voluntary service in community development, such as this study circle in Dandenong, Myanmar, and this study circle in Toronto, Canada. Also, the Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program gives young people between the ages of 12 and 15 the spiritual foundation to help them navigate through this critical stage in their development. These junior youth are studying together in Sinazezi, Zambia, and these junior youth are learning together in Tarabuco, Bolivia. Baha'is and their neighbors also participate in forming children's classes centered on the spiritual education of all the children in the neighborhood, village, or town. This children's class meets in South Tarawa, Kiribati, and this children's class in Nedrini, Panama, and this children's class meets in my neighborhood here in the United States. They had just finished making these little globes that represented the various religions represented in our neighborhood. The opportunity to help build spiritual capacity in our local community is a path of service open to everyone. Baha'u'lláh writes, "O Son of Spirit, noble have I created thee. Rise then unto that for which thou wast created." I want to leave you with some resources. This is the website of the Baha'is of the United States, and it can guide you to our community building efforts here in the United States. And here is the website. Also is this website of the worldwide Baha'i community, which can also guide you to these community building efforts throughout the globe, accessed here at this website. Because this gathering of the Parliament online, it reaches people from all parts of the world, I wanted to share this website of the Baha'i International Community, which is the agency through which the Baha'i community engages with the United Nations. Its work focuses on many of the same themes described in the Parliament's global ethic and can be accessed here. This website gives people access to the writings of the Baha'i Faith, the writings of Baha'u'lláh, Abdu'l-Baha, Shoghi Effendi, and the Universal House of Justice. This website will guide you through each day that Abdu'l-Baha spent in North America in the 239 days in America. The book, When the Moon Set Over Haifa, is available at the Parliament Expo. If you scroll down to the virtual bookstore, you'll find it there. It's also available at BahaiBookstore.com. Thank you for joining me in this commemoration of the passing of Abdu'l-Baha.